Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, sponsored by Canadian Small Church Connections. No, let's just call them Small Church Connections, although we're in Canada, which is a great thing. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action, with a very special guest. If you've been part of these podcast series, you've met him before, but we're going to meet him again and continue to hear from him. His name is Kevin, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. Why don't you just go back over some of the things that you've chatted about before, about who you are, what you're involved in, what your ministry experience has been. If that takes us 30 minutes, I'm sure it will be exciting.
Okay. Well, I'm Kevin Driver. I pastor a small international church in an international community called Banff, Alberta. Some people have heard of it, and that's the town.
Oh, okay, yes.
and I've been involved with Small Church Connections.
Yes.
Basically through my education, but I got involved with who we are by just being a pastor in the community, and then wanting to progress further. I upgraded my education, so I got a doctorate in rural community development.
Yeah.
And just also got very involved in the community as we were seeing a huge influx of immigration through the temporary foreign worker program and other avenues of immigration. And so before COVID, about 75% of my church was in the immigration process. And now it's probably just a little under half the church, as we've also had a huge demographic shift. We're predominantly Southeast Asia, and now we are seeing that shift, and it's also reflected in the community, a shift towards South Asia and Africa, and that's just a shift because of immigration streams. And so we're in a process of how would you say, retooling.
I believe it.
But our practices are pretty well the same. It's just coming back and redoing it, which I think is something small churches as a whole kind of get used to.
Yeah.
That there's cycles that happen, and I'm in a transient community, so our cycle happens probably a little faster, more along the lines of a university campus than say a town, because we have about a 40% turnover of staff every 6 months.
Is that right?
So about 50% of the town is on the move every 6 months.
Yeah.
Which is much like a university campus.
That would be definitely, yeah. and quite a bit different than a number of other places, but you have to work in the context of your community, and that's part of and part of welcoming people into the community is knowing what your community is. And
and then contextualizing and training ourselves up to be who God has called us to be, because God's gift of hospitality, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ drew near, or while we were yet strangers, Christ became a friend.
Yes.
and so as you know, to ask ourselves, what does that look like? And so it's been a wonderful journey. I have to say, it's not always been an easy journey. It's a very intentional journey, and yet it's one we feel the Lord has called us to.
Now, when you talk about newcomers, how do they? And I'm going to ask you a general question here, so it may not be so much your community as just what you've observed. How are we as a Western, you might even call it European Western group, versus a number of the newcomers, and you're talking South Asian and African. What do you see as the differences that you've had to adjust to, or whatever?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Okay, that'll take most of the podcast right there, I'm sure.
Yeah, it can. I think I think the big thing in our Western mindset is we tend to really uh, lift up
Hmm.
programs and process
Yeah.
as a whole. We really like to have what's a nice word, our ducks in a row.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Where our
and
schedules
and,
are
and
always
we
to the minute.
and
Yes.
we make that a virtue for the church.
Hmm.
And the immigrant community as a whole, that's not how they're viewing church. They're not viewing church because you've got a great program, or because you get things done very efficiently. They're viewing church as much more relational, which is also good news for rural, small town,
Yeah.
small churches, because as a whole we are relational.
Mhm.
And so it makes that we're uniquely positioned already to be involved. It's still some of our mindsets. We want to be like those big city churches, and so we push programs, we push process, and we don't often play to our strength. And so it's a relearning, and and um, and a willingness to learn on the behalf of the welcoming community.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the established community, to understand what are the needs of the people that are coming, and the needs is relational, on a relational level. They want to get together for celebration. They want to get together to be seen, to be heard, to be appreciated, to know that they haven't walked into this empty void of that's as barren as Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan landscape.
Okay. Now I'm
Or,
going to stop
as
you
a
there
lonely,
because
or as a
Saskatchewan.
lonely, or
Yeah.
as a
Yes.
lonely Rocky Mountain.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, we can have a discussion on that another day.
Yeah, I've always just called Saskatchewan an inverted landscape. Everything beautiful to see is in the valley.
Okay. Let's go back to being welcoming here, brother.
So it's understanding those felt needs. I mean, we're going to see what the need is, and we'll push that need, and yet it's about what is their felt need and what are they really after. And sometimes it's just learning, um, in that tension of welcoming and belonging, to understand what's being asked for, and a willingness to listen. And in that relationship is formed as we begin to see, oh, this person may just want a friendly face to talk to.
Which you're actually sort of starting into the question that I was going to ask, is that um, what okay, let's go right to your context.
Okay.
What would you say you have done and the church has done to be a welcoming community? Can you give one or two examples of that?
One of the things on a community level, one of the things that we got involved in is community conversations, intentional community conversations, especially on my part, engaging our community to become more welcoming, and engaging the helping agencies to work together. Um, and it's I think a privilege I have by being here for 23 years,
Mm-hmm.
to be a community partner. But the biggest thing too is I guess it comes down to, on a church level, is understanding what your church is, and the expectations, or the preconceptions that people have. Like everyone in every church is welcoming, but to what degree?
Yeah. Okay.
And what are the stereotypes or misconceptions we may have? Um, for instance, in America, we call it a melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, we call it a mosaic. And these are two terms that the church can grab onto, but they may not be accurate in meeting the need of the people coming in. Because in a melting pot, you're not necessarily intercultural. You're melting everyone down and literally diluting.
Okay, yeah.
And the preconception is, the hope is, there's enough of us that they become more like us than I become like them.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a comfortable position to be in if you are them. And then the cultural mosaic, which is great and works well in a city, presupposes a critical mass.
Mm-hmm.
Like yes, we're going to welcome the Filipino because we'll create a Filipino church. We'll welcome the South Sudanese and we'll create a South Sudanese church. But the assumption there is that you have a critical mass and a capacity for them to form a church or a Bible study or a language preference in their group. And quite frankly, in rural small towns, that, or even small churches, that just doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It may, like I have a Japanese church that I work with and a Japanese pastor, but that's the exception. That's not the norm. And so what do you do when you got one and two of this country, of that country? Like Banff right now is made up of 60 different nationalities.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. We were higher, but now we're lower, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's still more than the town I live in. Yes.
Yeah. And so what do? Do we see the Slovakian Christian? Do we see the Ukrainian Christian and tell them, well, yes, we'll support you, but why don't you find a few other Christians and have your Bible study?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's not going to work. And so this intercultural approach is intentional and it's contextual. And I know that's gonna be for a lot of small towns and especially rural places where there may not be a lot of immigration, but
Mm-hmm.
yet I have to say it's coming. Our national priority from our government is to push the immigration into rural areas, smaller places. And the reason for that is we have a bigger capacity to absorb them. The cities are already making, I got to be careful how I use that word, but they're making ethnic ghettos because they're creating that mosaic. And these people, I shouldn't even say these people,
Yep.
are unfortunately not getting into Canadian culture.
You
So taking
yeah.
taking longer to pick up language skills, cultural skills, even skills that are needed for a successful transition to a new cultural, a new country.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting what do I call it? I guess political is to be quite honest. It's a political question that's arising more and more, at least in my own readings and in my own understandings about how do we actually live as a multicultural, many different cultures, or are we really, as you say, the melting pot? Are we a mosaic? Who are we? What are we? And who determines how we welcome people, how we approach people? Is it going to be the government that says this is our lowest common denominator for who we are? Is it going to come out of a religious spiritual grouping? Okay? I'm rambling, but go for it.
You're rambling, but I think the first and most vital question in that is that if you're not a player, you're not a voice.
Okay, good point.
You just abdicate the answer. And so yes, it's political, but there's three realms that we operate on, and we operate in the political, the social, and the economic. And this is where a lot of the research on welcoming community comes in, is answering this as a holistic question, that these three areas of our life need to converge. And you need to bring the economic players, you need to bring the social players, you need to bring the political players to the table to answer this as a whole question. And that's part of what we do here in my community involvement. We run what's called an immigration partnership, and it's federally funded.
Hmm.
And I chair this, and so with 26 different helping agencies, we talk about some of these issues, and it's a privilege for me to be there, because obviously when it comes to religious issues, I have a religious perspective.
Good.
but but mine is one of many.
Hmm.
And yet I'm still privileged to be part of this group, and part of it is because as Christians we're called to love the place where we are.
Yeah.
You know, Jeremiah said to seek the peace of the place, for as it prospers you will prosper. And that's pretty well how I got involved. Is selfishly, I said, for my church to be sustainable in this community, we have to be part of this community. And we just can't sit on a corner and hold out our cross. We have to have others, just like the sign behind me here.
Yeah.
We have to have other hands helping us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great picture. Great flag, whatever, banner, whatever we want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's part of, asking what is the church, and the church is every tribe, tongue, and nation.
Yeah.
And also Peter said, we who were not a people are now a people. And it's because of what we have in common, which is a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that's never lost. But our faith has to live beyond the four walls.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting in rural Saskatchewan. I love my town. I've been here for a number of years. What kind of things do you think would be helpful for a small church pastor or leader to be involved in their community? I think you've touched on a number of things already, but maybe you have some others that would help us as we're welcoming people in.
Well, if you, I think if we look at what's the characteristic of a welcoming community, and there's Canadian research out of the University of Waterloo, says there's 17 characteristics in these three broad areas, and they're quite unique, because we're all unique in our talents and in our giftings of who's in the church, and you kind of start where you are. You can't, we're God called us to create, not out of ex nihilo, but out of tohu abohu, out of our chaos, out of our loaves and fishes. and so some of the things that we're looking at is employment opportunities. Am I, if you're got people who employ, you got some white collar people in your church, are they ethnically diverse in their hiring, and are they equal opportunity? Other things is affordable and suitable housing. I live in a community where nothing's affordable, but so we always constantly harp on, is it suitable?
Okay. Yeah.
So and we try to make it below market.
Yeah.
But it's not affordable.
No, I can imagine.
Positive attitudes. Is the church a place where we allow the conversations to call down immigration, call down the ethnic diversity, or even the presence of newcomers in the community? Are we a place that shelters the negative voices, or are we a place that works through those issues?
Well put. Yeah.
Because because that's a privilege we have as God's people. He's given us a voice. And I think that's one of our largest assets as a church is we tell the story, the narrative. And we've been privileged by God to do that because we're telling his story. So what is his story, his love for our community? And are we voicing it, or are we just like picking up David's mighty men who were all the disgruntled people? And David had to work with them. Well, if that's what you got, that's your starting point. And like David, he didn't let that be the ending point.
Yes, very much so.
So that's a big one. Other issues I'm looking at here. I have the 17 right before me, but I don't want to list them off because some are, like for us as a church, what can I do with a transportation issue?
Okay, yeah.
But you might be a church that has a bus. Have you ever thought of using that bus for the glory of God and just commuting people to doctor's appointments and larger grocery stores? Or even court.
Yeah, exactly.
Because honestly, that's how we got our regional transit is I was working with a group working with homelessness, and we were deadheading buses between the towns, like school buses.
Yeah.
And keeping track of those demographics. And because of those demographics, we could prove that we could sustain a transit.
Yeah, which means, yes, you have a transit now.
We have a transit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that wasn't something we were aiming for.
But it's something you're listening for. I think that's
something we're listening for. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's huge is that listening piece. And even when I'm listening, beginning to ask myself, what are my biases when I listen? Because obviously I'm listening for something. And oftentimes I'm listening because I want to give a solution, or I'm listening because I want to hear what I want or what I need. And trying to just allow people to listen to what the Spirit is saying.
It sort of sounds like marriage counseling in some ways, but if you're not listening, you're you're stopping.
Jesus said we are the bride.
That's true. It makes sense.
So the other thing is looking for social engagement opportunities. And they may not come in ways you think. But they come as opportunities.
Okay.
And understanding the languages that are spoken, and this is intercultural, the different languages, and it may not even be a foreign language, but it's a foreign language. It's a language of business. It's a language of medicine. It's a language of education, and understand. That's even a beginning of understanding for our local communities. Is there's many languages that are spoken in my community that I understand, but I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then I come back and try and solve it with a religious language.
Yeah, I'm always inclined to think, here's my next blog article. But yeah, the whole idea that when we come to Newcomers, we think immigrant. Okay, so they've got a different language. But I wonder if we aren't very welcoming because we don't understand the language of the mechanic. We don't understand the language of the doctors. We don't understand the language of the social services. And we expect that we can just walk in and say our piece in our good theological language. And yeah, no wonder you're not welcoming us. You don't even hear us. You don't even know us. Yeah.
But that's the huge part of what we do by bringing the community players together, and then as a faith community, we have another uniqueness in that we collect. Other groups are siloed within their mission, vision, and values.
Yeah.
And our mission and vision and values is to go into all the world.
Jump out of the silo. Yes, exactly.
Jump out of the silo and be the, I think it's in Colossians, it says Jesus is the glue or the adhesive that holds things together. Well, he's given us that privilege too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of really neat to see when it comes to community engagement. And it also is unique when you see families trying to navigate. I could share anecdotal stuff, but I'm worried it might get out and get back to me. But but it's just so neat working with a family that's in a crisis,
Mm.
and they may or may not have a faith that's as deep or as comparable to you, but they're looking for something.
Mhm.
They're looking for hope. They're looking for future. And they stumble in at the end of a church service. Are you going to tell them to come back next Sunday, or are you going to work with what God just gave you?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's beautiful to see when that faith comes alive in them, that when all of their world is destroyed, there's still a spiritual side.
Mm. Yeah.
And they reach out. They can be Hindu, they can be Muslim, they can be Buddhist, but they'll reach out to God when all they got is God. And we forget that in the immigration process, in the even newcomers to your community, they've left their supports hundreds or thousands of miles away.
Mhm.
And yes, they have the internet and stuff, but it's not hands-on. They can't feed you, they can't hold you, they can't even help you. They can only talk to you. and and so again, it just becomes so relational, which again is the good news
Yeah,
for the small church and the rural church, is we're relational to begin with.
exactly. And which makes sense then, that we should be the welcoming community. We should be the one that
Yes.
has newcomers that say, yes, I just love being here.
Yes.
You know what, Kevin? Our time's up already.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I've been watching. I sort of watch the clock every once in a while, and I say I could keep talking about this. It, I think it's a very important part of what we do as churches and what we need to be doing. So thank you. You've given some very good insight today, and just want to say thank you for joining us.
Okay, my pleasure. And Ron, if we got more topics on this, as you probably figured out, I can talk all day.
Sure, it sounds good. We'll save that for another day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.